Well, hello again. My name is Adam Cuppy, and I'm your host today on Collaboration Code Radio. I have my guest here, and this episode is going to be a little different than you've probably been hearing lately, but I want to introduce you to Will Liu. And Will is a veteran, so a former member of our armed forces. And he and I are going to chat through some of the ways in which those of you who might be listening now who have or are in the armed forces can utilize some of your benefits to move into a new career path into tech. Because as he's going to point out, this is software engineering specifically is not a role that you can assume inside the service. However, it is absolutely available to you after the fact. So we'll talk a little bit about that. He comes from a background and is now very much dedicated to helping folks and working with folks in other areas that are tangential to software. And we'll talk about that as well. So with all that being said, hi, Will. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for the sake of this, let's start with some of your background. So kind of give us we'll call it your origin story. Like take us back in time. Where do we begin?
So prior to coming to sunny San Diego, I was actually born and raised in Houston, Texas. Got my undergrad degree in a non-tech field, kinesiology. But after trying to figure out what to do with my life, what I want to be when I grow up, the Navy came up. Applied and ended up serving 4 years in the Navy as a surface warfare officer. It ultimately took me out of Texas, brought me down to San Diego, and since then it's been hard to leave. Transitioned out in 2017, went into management consulting for the federal government at Booz Allen. Did about 5 years of project management work, data visualization, and made my first pivot into tech. Went to a fintech startup early last year and ended up, I think, as many people, having to go through another transition. The company's still around, but they end up having to do RIF with staff. And through networking and different connections, ended up pivoting again into the government space. So currently, I'm working with a Navy program, the Navy Information Warfare Center Pacific. On a day-to-day, I'm interacting with engineers, project managers, contract specialists, people within acquisitions, but I'm that person who interacts with everybody, who has to speak multiple languages, deal with different personalities, and help make sure that the different projects that we come up with get delivered back to the military, and it works and it's successful.
I would imagine that the degree of empathy and context awareness that veterans are going to have coming into a position like one you're in is going to be quite meaningful and purposeful because, I'm not a service member myself. And I know that, but I do know from other contexts how much of that kind of prior knowledge plays a pretty substantial role into how I approach a problem that's in front of me. And I would assume that that's true here as well, right? That having been in the military, even for only 4 years, has just given a little bit of extra context and awareness on how to go about communication and handling some of that problem solving.
No, you're spot on. It's, you get presented with a task and there's nothing you can do on your own. Everything requires some degree of teamwork, some degree of interaction. Maybe this thing didn't work. You have to move a schedule. You need help with a function that you've never interacted with before. But you're constantly in a position where you're having to learn a new language, learn new terminology, figure out how these pieces interact with one another. And at the same time, you got to present status reports to senior leadership. So you're tailoring communication. You're kind of understanding the why, the high picture, the high level impact of everything, and then figuring out how do I tailor that communication. Get this person to buy into what I'm doing. And that's something that I think all service members leave with whenever they finish their service.
Mm-hmm. Now, it was interesting as we were talking, and I mentioned this a little earlier about how, things like software development, that's not a role that you can assume inside the service, which is interesting to me. It's very fascinating to think that because it's so fundamental to so many different things. And I would imagine, especially in our armed forces, that there are so many dependencies on software and the tooling there. So it seems quite interesting that that is not a role in the armed forces.
And it's been interesting to see that dynamic because where I'm at now, a lot of the software developers are the ones who are developing the programs that then get taken to the service members. So I'm kind of on the other side where I am meeting new developers, seasoned developers who are developing that code that ends up going back to the service member. And it's interesting to me that a lot of the people who are working on those projects actually haven't met the people uh, who are actually using what they've created. So I think there's a level of connection that could really, really happen that would be beneficial when you're meeting like in tech, you're meeting the end user, you're talking to the customers. And yeah, I think having that connection could be something that service members who know how to code could bring.
So what's really fascinating is so at Learn Academy, we heavily endorse the VET TEC program, which is through the VA. It's a
Hmm.
benefit that service members receive, and it allows them to go through a program like ours at virtually no cost to them aside from their time. So it seems like a really great opportunity as and in addition to that, at this point in time, at the time of recording this, it also doesn't take away from your GI benefits, your GI Bill benefits either. So it's really in addition to. So it seems like a really great utility for somebody to utilize to not only get their feet wet, but also potentially find a new career path where they could take advantage of their former service, that former context, and apply it into building those tools that other servicemen and women would be able to use. Which is kind
Hmm.
of what brought us to this conversation, right? Is kind of the benefit that that program can bring to that kind of career growth as well, right?
Yeah. And we always talk about risk in the military. And for me, when I looked at the VET Tech program, I did a full stack developer program through VET Tech. And for me, minus the time commitment, I absolutely loved it. I look at a website differently now. I'm in business school right now, part time. And whenever we come up with code, like whenever we test Python a bit, I've used it, took a SQL class, and just having some background of how to write code, jumping into SQL wasn't different, or even just a basic Excel function. Just having some knowledge of how to write lines of code and how things work together. I'm not writing code now for a living, but I understand it. Things make sense. I know where to look up things. If you give me terminology, I can figure out where to find it. So I left that tech with a great baseline knowledge of tech code. So just the concept of it isn't even intimidating anymore. Versus before the program even started, if you're like, hey, I want you to write code, I'd probably just say go find someone else, or give
Sure.
me no way, impossible. But it's something you can tackle now because I had that confidence to do it as a result of that tech.
That is really cool. I think it is a wonderful thing. I come from stage acting, and very often I get asked the question like, "What have you used from your acting degree that you put to use?" And I'm like, oh, "Where should I begin?" Which is true with so many people who are going through a career transition, is they're taking from other experiences and bringing them into the new experience. Which, especially in this situation, where especially in our armed forces, there's so much there to have learned from. There's so much context there. There's so much positive reinforcing structure. There's so much around discipline and dependability. I mean, these are traits that are very heavily instilled into, our various programs in that way, that it also makes a lot of sense that those would be highly valued on a technical team. And
Sure.
so kind of making that transition into software, even if your role is not directly into writing software, but maybe into project management or product management, things along those lines, that would be of high value to an organization. And so making that transition would be a great thing.
No, I agree. It's like my current supervisor always talks about how she can train someone to be technical, but she can't train someone to communicate well, how to interact with people. There's so many intangible things that you gain from your time in service that you can't just watch a YouTube video and pick up. You can't just listen to a podcast and pick up. It's experience. You gain it through interacting with people, and you take all these things that are difficult to teach that you already have, and then you actually put them through something you can teach, which is software development or just learning how to code. So VET TEC definitely offers that bridge for service members who it's often you're going to hear this a lot of service members have told me I'm not technical, or we'll go somewhere conversation talk about, oh, I can't do that, I don't have a tech background. So this is just one of those many solutions that help bridge that gap and almost remove that excuse of saying I'm not technical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very cool. So for yourself, I'm really curious, what was sort of the thing that really made you want to go down this path, especially after your 4 years? Like, what was there some direct impetus that was like, this is why I want to make that choice? Was it something you were naturally drawn to, or you saw an opportunity somewhere? Like, give us an idea of that for you.
I am an example of the service members I've met. I came from essentially like a program manager background, uh, nothing technical whatsoever. So for me, going into the workforce, to be honest, I noticed the people who are technical get paid more. They have they have
Yeah,
more
sure.
opportunities.
There's a
They're
pretty direct incentive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just at the end of the day, there's plenty of work. If you look at a lot of the remote work that people are looking for right now, a lot of it's technical.
Hmm.
Um, so honestly, the incentive for me was the opportunity. There's just so much more opportunity when that thing that nobody else can do, or that thing that a lot of people are shying away from, or such a small percentage of people can do. Uh, at least the way I approach my career is, how do I try to become that unicorn who has all these skills, who's combined so many different skills that nobody else can compete with? So for me, going into learning how to code was to add that extra card in the stack, or add the extra skill set to hopefully just become a better candidate and make myself a more attractive, I guess, consultant at the time for the company.
I love that. Yeah. Relatedly, you know, because I come from a background that doesn't seem like a natural path into tech, coming through very expressive art form like theater. One of the great advantages I will say is that selfishly, my story sounds really interesting. And right. I mean, and it actually creates an interesting addition of engagement, especially when I am going through the interview process, is it gives
Sure.
an opportunity for me to stand out in a way
Yeah.
that is just simply by proxy of having that former experience. Which relatedly, aside from being a veteran, but coming from another career path, regardless of what it is, that's a part of that your story that makes you unique aside from other candidates. It's one of the things we talk about on the career services side of, there as look at it fortunately or unfortunately, so kind of in a neutral way. Standing out is really important because of how many people are probably applying for the very same role you are. And
Yeah.
if you are doing it the same way and you appear situationally the same, and your resumes look the same and your covers letters are all looking the same, then you're no more unique than the person to your left and to your right. But the reality is that we are all very unique if we embrace that history and not let go of those things that we did before we pursued this. And so, in addition to all these things of learning discipline and structure and how to manage and communicate with others, also bringing into the fold former experiences as a veteran into being working for a fintech company or any company for that matter is a real leg up. I mean, there's a real advantage to that in terms of just standing out to get the job. So I would totally agree with that. I'm really curious about what were your expectations versus the reality of actually coming into tech any different? Like, did you start with certain expectations, either stereotypes or just kind of beliefs around what you'd expect, and those to be different on the other side of it after you'd gone through the process? Was there any changes there that come to mind?
They, I think there's a lot of functions that you don't get exposed to within the military or even within consulting. So it was uncommon back then for me to meet a product manager, to meet with someone gathering consumer insights, to meet with a business development team, to meet with people overseas, like in a different country doing engineering work. There are so many aspects of tech that I was never exposed to. So it was really, really eye opening to, for example, during my interview, I talked to the COO, and coming from that's like, like you're not gonna, outside of a startup, it's kind of uncommon. Like you're not gonna meet someone so senior during the interview process. Just the level of interaction, the coordination, the people were phenomenal. I think I went in every day thinking this is incredible, the level of talent that I'm meeting, how quickly people are able to turn out a product or take an insight and fix a bug or implement a new feature. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but at the same time, you left feeling really fulfilled because you're in it with everybody. Like you have that teamwork aspect, and everybody's tired, but everybody's excited. So
Uh-huh.
it really, really keeps you going.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the same thing. It reminds me about stage theater too. It's like you're in it together. You're like, we're all trying to pull this thing off. Our timeline is shrinking. Our budget is gone. Like, you know, we're all stressed, but just endlessly excited. And yeah, I would imagine that's very true. Yeah, for sure. It's very, very true. Um, the so speaking more to those folks that are listening right now who are considering utilizing their benefits, assuming that we're speaking to folks that are veterans,
Sure.
considering making that leap. What are some of the things that might come to mind on how to prepare for a transition into a program, whether it's with Learn or otherwise? Is there anything that you'd recommend for them, ways to think about it, or let's do some expectation setting if we could around that from your vantage point?
What helped me make that transition was the program I went through offered this, I want to say 1 to 2 week crash course in Python, almost like a Python 101. And the only thing you had to do was sign up for it. So I think it's hard to replicate what it's like to write code if you're just watching it on a video. Like you really, really have to do it. And whether it's through Learn or another program, I highly recommend just taking a short class, write a little bit, or do one of the free programs online. But give it a shot and just see if you like it. I For me, my brain is very, very point A to point B, really, really line by line, structured. So once it started to click in my head, I was like, "This is cool. I can do it."
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's still a big transition for I think for anybody, but I've loved it.
Yeah, there's a program we offer called Jumpstart, which is designed entirely to do this. It's like get your feet wet. The we've talked a lot lately, especially about that it is quite inexpensive, practically free how to learn how to code. It almost doesn't make sense for most people to go spend any amount of money to learn how to just do the coding part of the
Mhm.
work. But there is a vast majority of learning how to be a developer has nothing to do with the code you're writing. It has to do with how you learn to learn because
Mhm.
the code's going to constantly change. What you're using today will not be the thing you use in 5 years, very
Yeah,
likely.
yeah,
So being able to adapt to that is really important. Communication, really important. Stress management,
yeah.
insanely important because if we're doing the thing we assume we're going to do, which is innovate, by its definition, it means that we're going to be doing new things all the time. And
Mhm.
so being able to manage the stress of timelines, deadlines, responsibilities, also just feeling like you don't know what you're doing and it's the confusion, like managing that is really important. And also how critical it is that we take the time to enjoy it, right? Like learn to enjoy it because it isn't for everybody.
Sure.
Some people, their brains just they don't enjoy. My wife is an example who's a phenomenal creator, but it's just not something she enjoys to do. Sitting in front of a computer, writing random looking characters, it's just not something she digs. It's okay. And so taking that opportunity to figure that out before you make a massive leap into a program where you're going to commit a lot of your time, spend a reasonable amount of money, or utilize a benefit that you have available to you, uh, it's important. Like dip your toe in the water first. So I definitely echo that sentiment as well. Any other advice or encouragement things, again, around the expectation setting that you think would be important if you were somebody that might take advantage of a benefit like this to think about beforehand?
I was surprised that I liked the front end side of coding more than the back end.
Mm,
I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know there were, they could be different or they could be different roles. Like you talking about having that mind for coding. Maybe you do, maybe you learn both, but you decide that I like one better than the other. Like you're not really stuck. Like I'm trying to update my personal portfolio now, and even even the pre-made, ready to go type programs still touch on terminology that I've learned from VET TEC. So I haven't escaped it. It still comes up. But yeah, I think the main thing is just to try. It's really
hmm
hard to know until you give it a shot. And you mentioned the Jumpstart program. I think that's a great idea. You really just have to give it a go and see what you think. Like anything else in life, there's a little bit of risk, but you don't know until you try.
for sure. So where do you see yourself going? You just talked about updating your own portfolio. Like where in your journey, and your employer isn't listening, so don't worry about it. You could say all your deep, dark career path secrets right now. But like, kind of like, what's your trajectory look like? You're, paint us the picture of 5 years, 10 years from now for you. Like, what is it that you're shooting for?
It's hard to say. It's
Hmm.
a lot of stuff up in the air. I'm still in school right now, working on an MBA, so that'll be done in December. Um, for me, I almost just want to take a break for a year and let my mind reset.
Yeah.
I There's a part of me that loves seeing pieces come together. Maybe it's like growing up playing with Legos or different puzzles, but would love to be in a role where I'm interacting with different groups of people and I'm kind of like that person who's talking to developers on one end, talking with operations on another end, and connecting all these pieces together, and bringing something forward, a product, a project. Um, yeah. So, yeah, not the most concrete answer, but I think I'm kind of in that mode of let me just meet everybody, talk to everybody, get involved with as many industries as possible. And I think with time, I think I'll meet someone one day and be like, that's it. That's what I want to do. And as I've met more people, I realize I don't have to have it figured out. Everyone I meet, they're like, no, I'm still figuring it out. And there's
Hmm.
someone who I think has already figured it out, but like, nope, I'm still kind of deciding my own path. So the pressure's kind of been relieved, but at the same time, I'm an avid learner. So, I'm still practice. I just took a SQL class through school. I'm constantly learning what's something new just to see when that time comes, I'm ready to snatch that opportunity.
You're pointing something out I think is so critical, and that is to not believe that being a software developer is one single definable thing, that there are so many roles. It's like being in tech is like saying you're in fashion. It's just so broad. There are so many different types of roles. There are so many types of companies. There's big companies, small companies, intimate scenarios where it's you and one other person that's building this vast thing versus being on a large team where you're innovating something major. It's so broad and so vast, which can make it very overwhelming because it's like, well, then where do I start? Yet at the same time is just know that it kind of doesn't matter. And I think that's the point you're saying that really I resonate with, is like, it doesn't matter really where you start. It's actually more important just that you start.
Yeah.
and that you are following a path that excites you today and not just taking what's in front of you at face value, that there's just so much more to it. And we were talking a lot a bit about the career path of a software developer. And just right before this interview, I was meeting with somebody where we were talking about this and the different, stages that a person who writes code may go through. And it is incredibly vast, right? I mean, just in programming alone, you can go from an entry level software developer that's focusing just on, back end work such as Ruby or Ruby on Rails or Python, something like that. And you're almost never touching front end work. You're never touching a mobile app. And then one day you're like, I want to give that design thing a try. And I'm going to go front end. And then all of a sudden I'm going to weave my way to mobile apps. And then I'm going to weave my way to games. And then I think I want to be an entrepreneur of sorts that is more of a product manager who sort of oversees the design of the feature. I mean, it's just so vast. And so it really, again, doesn't actually matter where you start, but might take advantage of starting, And I think going back to this whole VET TEC, utilizing VET TEC it's one of the greatest parts about the program. For those that it applies to, is like you are getting an incredible benefit to get yourself into an industry, and your options are so vast that if one thing doesn't work out, you can pick something different and still end up with reasonably good money, if not great money, living and functioning the way you want to function on a day-to-day basis, and your avenues to growth are almost immeasurable. So it's really cool. And so I appreciate you mentioning that, because it's absolutely true that it's just so broad and vast.
And I mean, I was talking with we had this meeting with it's like my supervisor's supervisor, and it was just talking about a shortage of like a lot of people who come out of the military have a security clearance, and but very like we mentioned, very few know how to code. And he's like, yeah, we have a shortage of software developers, and a lot of the work that we work on is requires having that level of clearance. So right off the bat, you already knocked out the hardest thing, or that big barrier that people can't even break into. You just have to learn the skill, and the demand is there. Like, it, compared to different industries that may not have opportunities right now, this is a field and an industry that has that demand, and they are looking for people right now. So the opportunity is definitely there.
Well, looking at the time, it's time for us to wrap up. I really appreciate you chatting with us, Will. You know, I think the opportunities for veterans regarding their benefits to create an incredible career path for themselves after they've left the service is incredible. And I really appreciate you telling us your journey going through that yourself. And also that you're now going through a secondary program, getting your MBA as well. And I'm really going to be fascinated to figure out how you weave it all together, because I
I'm
mean,
trying.
if you are an MBA with a technical programming background, you're going to probably be just fine.
That's the hope.
Well, very good. Well, anything for our audience before we go?
uh, I'll make a quick plug. Here in San Diego, I lead the Veteran Spirit Club, or a networking group located all around the U.S. They actually have one in Bend, Oregon, but our biggest one's in San Diego. Think of that one thing people tell you to keep doing, networking, but you don't necessarily know how to do. We bridge that gap. Super informal. Come by, have a beverage of any kind, and just meet someone new. That's how I first learned about Learn Academy, and I've been trying to make that connection to bring in, just make that connection, bring in more veterans into the program. But that's something I do on the side. And yeah, give it a shot. Really, really big fan of VET TEC. It's can't think of the right word, but it's that one thing that people should know about, that people aren't taking advantage of.
Well, excellent. Well, with that, thank you so much for your time. And to all of you listening, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Even if it didn't directly apply to you, I hope you got a little something out of it. And if, again, you are in the service and you would like to know as a veteran how to take advantage of some of these benefits, you could reach out to our team, and we're not only really well informed, but more than happy to help. And then aside from that is, if you know anybody that is either a veteran or is trying to take advantage or consider how they might make a career into tech, again, have them reach out to us, or even, send us a note, and we're happy to reach out to them as well, because more than anything, we want to help people find a career path that works for them. With that, thank you so much for your time, Will, and thank you so much for listening. And until next time.
Thanks, Adam.